In the crystalline waters of the Mediterranean, where myths and reality blur like morning mist over ancient stones, lies a secret that history has tried desperately to bury. A secret so disturbing that even the Romans' masters of documented cruelty chose to wrap it in silence. Picture this. You're scrolling through your day, perhaps checking where you're listening to this story from. Leave a comment below and let me know which corner of the world you're in. And if this tale of forgotten horrors captivates you as much as it should, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to follow this journey into the darkest recesses of human nature. But today, we're not just talking about any historical atrocity. We're diving deep into a practice so vile, so unthinkably savage, that it makes the gladiatorial games look like children's entertainment. We're talking about an island lost to time, erased from maps, whispered about only in the most carefully guarded manuscripts, where Roman senators gathered to hunt human beings like animals, not metaphorically, literally. Naked slaves, released into the wild terrain of this forgotten island, pursued by Rome's most powerful men for the ultimate thrill, the hunt of human prey. This isn't fantasy. This isn't the fevered imagination of Hollywood screenwriters. This is history's most carefully buried secret, and today we're going to unearth it, piece by terrifying piece. The question isn't whether such horrors could exist. We know too much about human nature to doubt that. The question is, how did an entire civilization, known for its meticulous record-keeping, manage to hide this practice so completely that we're only now beginning to piece together the truth? To understand how Roman society could descend into such depravity, we must first understand the machine that was the Roman Empire at its height. By the 1st century CE, Rome had transformed from a scrappy republic into the most powerful empire the world had ever known. But with that power came corruption so profound, it would make modern scandals look like playground squabbles. The Roman elite lived in a world where human life had been commodified to an extent that's difficult for us to comprehend today. Slaves weren't just workers, they were living property, no different from livestock or furniture. The wealthy Roman could buy, sell, torture, or eliminate their human property without legal consequence. This wasn't hidden or shameful. It was the fundamental structure of their society. Consider this. By the 1st century CE, historians estimate that 1 in every 3 people in the Italian peninsula was enslaved. In Rome itself, the ratio was even higher. These weren't just foreign captives, these were human beings, born into bondage, raised as property, and treated as expendable resources for the entertainment and convenience of their masters. The transformation of Roman entertainment tells us everything we need to know about their moral descent. What began as religious ceremonies and athletic competitions evolved into the Venetians' spectacular hunts, where exotic animals were slaughtered by the thousands for public amusement. But even these weren't enough to satisfy the bloodlust of Rome's elite. The Emperor Titus, supposedly one of the good emperors, celebrated the opening of the Colosseum with games that lasted 100 days. During this festival of death, over 11,000 animals were slaughtered. Elephants, lions, bears, rhinoceros, entire species were driven to extinction in certain regions just to feed Rome's appetite for blood. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The public Venetians were just the beginning. What happened when the crowd went home? What did Rome's wealthiest and most powerful do when they wanted entertainment that even the jaded Roman populace might find disturbing? They went to the islands. The Roman Empire was dotted with islands that served various purposes. Some were used for exile political prisoners, and troublesome family members were shipped off to remote rocks to live out their days in isolation. Others served as private retreats where the wealthy could indulge in pleasures. Too extreme, even for Rome's permissive society. These islands became laboratories of human experimentation, places where the normal constraints of law and society simply didn't apply. And on one particular island, whose name has been carefully scrubbed from most historical records, something happened that was so horrifying that even the Romans, who watched children fight to the death for entertainment, chose to pretend it never occurred. The clues are there, scattered across ancient texts like breadcrumbs leading to a house of horrors. Fragmentary references to special hunts organized for distinguished guests. Mentions of islands where unique entertainments were provided for senators and wealthy merchants. Accounting records that show enormous sums spent on exotic quarry and live games shipped to unnamed islands. But perhaps most telling are the silences, the deliberate gaps in otherwise meticulous Roman records. The way certain senators' activities during specific time periods are simply missing from the historical record. The care with which later Roman historians avoided mentioning certain practices, referring to them only obliquely as entertainments unfit for civilized discourse. This wasn't just wealthy Romans behaving badly. This was systematic, organized, and recurring. It was an institution as formal and structured as the Senate itself. And, like all Roman institutions, it left traces if you know where to look. To understand where these horrific hunts took place, we need to examine the Roman relationship with islands. In the Roman mind, islands existed in a liminal space, neither fully part of the civilized world nor completely wild. They were perfect for activities that needed to remain hidden from the mainland's prying eyes. The most famous of these retreat islands was Capri, where Emperor Tiberius spent the last 11 years of his life in what historians politely call retirement. But Tiberius's activities on Capri were anything but peaceful contemplation. According to the historian Suetonius, the emperor's villa was decorated with the most explicit pornographic art imaginable, and he organized what he called sexual athletics, performed by groups of young people for his amusement. But Tiberius's depravities, shocking as they were, pale in comparison to what was happening on other, less famous islands. The Villa Hobis, Tiberius's main residence on Capri, featured the infamous Leap of Tiberius, a cliff from which the emperor allegedly threw slaves and guests who had outlived their usefulness. The drop was over 200 feet onto jagged rocks below. Yet Capri was well known, frequently visited by officials and merchants. Whatever happened there, disturbing as it might be, was still semi-public. The truly horrific activities required complete isolation. Enter the Pontine Islands, a small archipelago about 60 miles west of Naples. These volcanic islands had served as places of exile since the early empire. Ponza, the largest, housed political prisoners and troublesome members of the imperial family. It was here that Augustus banished his own daughter Julia for adultery. Adultery in imperial Rome often meant political inconvenience. But the Pontine Islands held more than exiled aristocrats. Scattered across ancient port records are references to regular shipments to these islands of what Roman documents carefully termed live cargo. Not animals, those were specifically listed as beasts or by species. Live cargo was the euphemism for human beings. Even more intriguing are the Tuscan islands, particularly Pianosa, known in antiquity as Planasia. This flat, isolated island was officially uninhabited. Yet Roman records show significant construction projects there during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. What were they building on an uninhabited island? And why do the records suddenly stop mentioning Planasia entirely after 165 CE? Archaeological evidence from these islands tells a disturbing story. Excavations on Ponza have revealed evidence of large underground chambers that historians have struggled to explain. These weren't typical Roman construction. They were more like holding pens. Stone channels led from these chambers to the coastline, suggesting some kind of systematic movement of ... something. From the chambers to boats. On Pianosa, aerial surveys have revealed the ghostly outlines of what appear to be enclosures scattered across the island's interior. From above, they look disturbingly like hunting preserves, large areas surrounded by walls with multiple entrance points and what appear to be observation posts. The official archaeological explanation is that these were livestock enclosures. But the design is all wrong for containing animals. The walls are too high, the entrances too complex, the observation posts too elaborate. Most telling of all are the bones. Scattered excavations across these islands have turned up human remains that don't fit the expected patterns. These aren't proper burials. They're scattered bone fragments, showing clear evidence of trauma. Breaks consistent with falls, cuts from weapons, and perhaps most disturbing, clear evidence of teeth marks from predatory animals. The official explanation is that these are the remains of prisoners who died of natural causes and were improperly buried. But forensic analysis tells a different story. These people died violently, and their bodies were left to be consumed by scavengers. But the most chilling evidence comes from the island's toponymy, their place names. Many locations on these islands bear names that translate roughly to the running ground. Later, Roman administrators tried to rename these locations, but the original names persisted in local dialects for centuries. One particular cove on Ponza is still known locally as the Place of Screaming. When asked about the name's origin, elderly islanders will tell you it comes from the sounds that echoed across the water on certain nights during the imperial period. Sounds that weren't quite human, but weren't quite animal either. To understand how Romans could systematically hunt human beings for sport, we need to trace the evolution of their entertainment from public spectacle to private horror. The progression is as logical as it is terrifying. Roman society was built on the principle that human life had different values depending on social status. A citizen's life was worth more than a slave's, a senator's more than a plebeian's, an emperor's more than anyone's. This hierarchy wasn't just social, it was literally legal. Killing a slave wasn't murder, it was destruction of property. The public Venetians' animal hunts in amphitheaters had established the template for organized killing as entertainment. But these public spectacles came with limitations. They were expensive, logistically complex, and subject to public scrutiny. Even Romans had limits to what they would applaud in public. But what about private entertainment for those who could afford it? What about hunts organized specifically for the wealthy and powerful, away from the constraints of public opinion? The evidence suggests that these private hunts began as enhanced versions of the public Venetians. Wealthy Romans would purchase exotic animals and organize private hunts on their estates. This was legal, socially acceptable, and relatively common. But for some, even hunting lions and bears became routine. The next logical step was to make the prey more challenging. Historical fragments suggest that the first human hunts involved condemned criminals. Roman law already allowed for elaborate public executions. Criminals were regularly thrown to wild animals or forced to fight to the death. Organizing private hunts using condemned prisoners was just a more exclusive version of existing practice. But here's where the evidence becomes truly disturbing. The records suggest that these hunts evolved beyond using condemned criminals. They began to use slaves specifically purchased for the purpose, and not just any slaves, young, healthy individuals who were deliberately kept in peak physical condition for the hunt. The Roman agricultural writer Marcus Fulvius Nobilior, who served as consul in 189 BCE, organized what historical records carefully describe as specialized entertainments for visiting senators. These entertainments took place on an unnamed island and involved what Nobilior's correspondence refers to as the most challenging quarry. Contemporary accounts describe these events in language that seems designed to obscure rather than clarify. They mention participants who were released into the terrain and pursued according to ancient custom. The prize for successful hunters was not just the thrill of the chase, but trophies taken from their quarry. What kind of trophies? The records are coyly silent, but archaeological evidence from certain Roman villas suggests heads, hands, and other body parts were preserved and displayed as hunting trophies. Not metaphorical trophies, literal human remains, prepared and mounted like hunting prizes. The organization of these hunts was remarkably sophisticated. Roman engineers designed special boats for transporting the quarry to the hunting islands. These vessels featured multiple locked compartments below deck and what appear to be exercise areas, where the intended prey could be kept in physical condition during transport. The hunt on Planasia has ended, but the questions it raises about human nature and the price of power remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire fell, its monuments crumbled, its armies were defeated, and its territories were divided among successor states. But the moral lessons of its darkest chapters live on, waiting for each new generation to discover and grapple with them. We began this journey by asking how an entire civilization could hide such systematic horror. We end it understanding that the real question isn't how they hid it, it's how we can ensure that such horrors never again find fertile ground in human society. The answer lies not in our institutions or our laws, but in our willingness to see the full humanity of every person, regardless of their status, their circumstances, or their powerlessness. The slaves who died on Planasia were human beings with hopes, fears, dreams, and the same fundamental desire for life and dignity that drives us all. The Romans forgot this truth, and in forgetting it, they made themselves capable of unthinkable cruelty. Their failure serves as a permanent warning about what happens when societies lose sight of the essential human worth of every individual. As we close this dark chapter of history, we carry with us both the horror of what humans can do to each other, and the hope that understanding these failures can help us build a more humane future. The voices of those who died as quarry on the forgotten island may be silent, but their story continues to speak a testament to the resilience of human dignity and the importance of never forgetting the full truth of our past. The hunt is over. The reckoning continues, especially when those stories are too terrible to easily bear. *S themselves followed specific rules. The quarry was given a head start, typically released at dawn and not pursued until midday. They were provided with minimal supplies and basic tools. The hunters followed on foot, accompanied by specially trained dogs and armed with hunting spears and nets. The goal wasn't just to kill any. Roman could do that with a sword. The goal was the hunt itself, the thrill of pursuit, the challenge of tracking human prey through difficult terrain, the satisfaction of bringing down the most dangerous game of all, another human being with the intelligence and desperation to evade capture. Participants in these hunts included some of the most prominent names in Roman history: senators, wealthy merchants, and even some members of the imperial family are mentioned in fragmentary records as having participated in these island expeditions. The psychological appeal is horrifyingly clear. For men who already had unlimited power over human life, who could buy and sell people like livestock, who could order executions without consequence, the ultimate luxury was the personal, physical experience of hunting another human being. But this wasn't random violence. It was organized, systematic, and remarkably well documented, till suddenly it wasn't. After years of piecing together fragmentary evidence, cross-referencing archaeological findings with textual analysis, and following the breadcrumb trail of deliberately obscured Roman records, we can finally identify the primary location of these horrific hunts. The island was Pianosa, known in Roman times as Planasia, a flat, isolated piece of land in the Tuscan archipelago. Today, it's a nature preserve, largely uninhabited and forgotten. But for roughly a century, during the height of the Roman Empire, it served as the primary hunting ground for the most depraved entertainment ever organized by civilized humans. Pianosa was perfect for this purpose, flat enough to make hiding difficult, but large enough to make the hunt challenging, far enough from major shipping routes to ensure privacy, but close enough to mainland ports to make regular expeditions practical. And most importantly, it was officially uninhabited, giving the Romans plausible deniability about what happened there. Roman records from the port of Ostia show regular shipments to Planasia during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. These shipments included construction materials, weapons, hunting equipment, and significant quantities of live cargo. The ships returned, carrying what manifests describe as trophies and specimens. Archaeological evidence on modern Pianosa tells the rest of the story. The mysterious enclosures visible from aerial surveys aren't random ruins. They're the remains of an elaborate hunting preserve designed specifically for pursuing human prey. The largest enclosure, covering nearly 2 square miles in the island's center, was surrounded by walls just high enough to prevent easy escape, but low enough to allow hunters to track their quarry's movement. Multiple entrance points allowed for varied hunt scenarios, while elevated observation posts let spectators watch the action unfold. But perhaps most chilling are the remains of what archaeologists have termed preparation facilities near the island's harbor. These are underground chambers carved directly into the rock, connected by tunnels to the harbor and to the hunting grounds. The chambers show clear evidence of human habitation, but not willing habitation. Iron rings set into the walls, drainage channels cut into the floors, and scratch marks on the stone surfaces tell the story of terrified human beings held in these chambers, while awaiting their turn as quarry in the ultimate hunt. Analysis of human remains found on Pianosa reveals the systematic nature of these hunts. The bones show clear evidence of pursuit injuries, wounds consistent with spear thrusts, cuts from hunting knives, and trauma from falls while attempting escape. But they also show evidence of something even more disturbing: deliberate mutilation after death. Roman hunters didn't just kill their human prey, they harvested trophies. Examination of the bones reveals systematic removal of hands, heads, and other body parts. These weren't battlefield casualties or the results of wild animal attacks. This was deliberate, ritualistic dismemberment by human hunters claiming their prizes. The timeline of activity on Pianosa corresponds precisely with the peak period of Roman imperial excess. The hunts began during the reign of Tiberius and reached their height under emperors like Caligula and Nero. They continued sporadically through the 2nd century before apparently ending entirely during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. Why did they stop? The evidence suggests that Marcus Aurelius, known for his philosophical bent and relative moral restraint, discovered the extent of these activities and ordered them ended. More importantly, he ordered all records destroyed and all participants sworn to secrecy. This explains the sudden disappearance of references to Planasia in Roman records after 165 CE. The island didn't cease to exist, it was simply erased from official history. Maps were redrawn, shipping records were altered, and any reference to the island's use as a hunting preserve was systematically eliminated from official documents. But you can't completely erase history. Fragments survive, scattered references in private letters, accounting records that escaped the purge, archaeological evidence that no amount of bureaucratic censorship can eliminate. The most damning evidence comes from a private letter discovered in 1987 during excavations of a Roman villa near Naples. The letter, written by a senator named Gaius Cornelius Tacitus, not the famous historian, but a contemporary with the same name, describes in explicit detail his participation in what he calls the ultimate hunt on an unnamed island. The letter describes the release of 12 specimens of prime quality into the hunting grounds, followed by a day-long pursuit that resulted in satisfactory kills by all participants. Tacitus goes on to describe the trophies taken and his intention to display them in his villa's trophy room alongside the heads of lions and bears from more conventional hunts. The casual tone of the letter is perhaps more chilling than its content. For Tacitus, hunting human beings was just another form of entertainment, no more morally significant than hunting wild boar. This wasn't aberrant behavior by isolated psychopaths. This was systematic, organized, and socially acceptable entertainment for Rome's elite. The fact that it was kept secret wasn't because the participants felt shamed, was because they wanted to keep the ultimate luxury for themselves. The most remarkable aspect of these horrific hunts isn't that they happened given what we know about Roman society. Human hunting was almost inevitable. The truly remarkable thing is how completely they were erased from the historical record. The systematic elimination of evidence surrounding the hunting practices on Planasia represents one of the most successful historical cover-ups ever attempted. It required coordinated effort across multiple levels of Roman administration and succeeded so completely that for nearly 2 millennia, these events existed only as whispered rumors and fragmentary clues. The cover-up began during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, around 165 CE. Historical evidence suggests that the philosopher Emperor discovered the extent of the hunting activities through a routine investigation into suspicious shipping expenses. What he found horrified even a man accustomed to the casual cruelties of Roman governance. Marcus Aurelius faced a difficult choice. Public revelation of the hunts would have caused a massive scandal, potentially destabilizing the government, and certainly destroying the careers and reputations of dozens of prominent senators and officials. But allowing the practices to continue was unthinkable for a man whose philosophical writings emphasized human dignity and moral responsibility. His solution was characteristic of Roman pragmatism: complete suppression combined with absolute prohibition. The hunts were ended immediately. All participants were sworn to secrecy, and a systematic campaign was launched to eliminate every trace of evidence. The thoroughness of this cover-up reveals the sophistication of Roman administrative machinery. Official shipping records were altered to remove references to live cargo shipments to Planasia. Port authorities were ordered to destroy manifests and logs relating to the island. Maps were redrawn to minimize the island's apparent significance. Most importantly, the island itself was officially redesignated as a restricted military zone, off-limits to civilian traffic. This provided a cover story for why ships no longer visited Planasia, while ensuring that no one could investigate the facilities that remained on the island. The human cost of this cover-up was enormous. Evidence suggests that many of the slaves who had worked on the island-maintaining facilities, preparing quarry, disposing of remains, were eliminated to ensure their silence. Guards, ship crews, and administrative personnel who had knowledge of the hunts simply disappeared from the historical record. But the most systematic elimination involved the documentary evidence. Roman bureaucracy was notoriously thorough in its record-keeping, but virtually every document relating to the hunting activities has vanished. This wasn't random. Loss was deliberate destruction on a massive scale. Private letters and personal accounts were confiscated and destroyed. Financial records were altered or eliminated. Even architectural plans for the facilities on Planasia were removed from official archives. The Romans literally tried to erase the hunts from history. This campaign was largely successful, but not completely. Some evidence survived in unexpected places: private letters that escaped confiscation, accounting records that were overlooked, archaeological evidence that couldn't be destroyed without leveling the entire island. The survival of evidence was often accidental. The letter from Gaius Cornelius Tacitus, describing his participation in the hunts, only survived because it was stored in a sealed container that wasn't discovered until modern archaeological excavations. Other fragments survived in the margins of unrelated documents, or as casual references in texts about completely different topics. But perhaps the most significant evidence survived in the form of psychological impact on the participants themselves. Several prominent Romans, who are known to have participated in the hunts, underwent dramatic personality changes in their later years. Some became reclusive, others turned to extreme forms of religious observance, and a few committed suicide under mysterious circumstances. The senator Lucius Annaeus Seneca, who served as advisor to Emperor Nero, wrote extensively about guilt, moral responsibility, and the psychological burden of past actions. While his writings never explicitly mention the hunts, they contain references to unnamed horrors and acts that haunt the conscience beyond all forgiveness. Some historians have speculated that Seneca's philosophical turn toward Stoicism was a response to his participation in or knowledge of the human hunts. His letters to Lucilius contain passages that seem to describe the psychological aftermath of extreme violence. There are some acts so terrible that they destroy not only the victim but the perpetrator. The hunter becomes the hunted, pursued by his own conscience through waking hours and nightmares alike. The long-term impact of the cover-up extended far beyond the immediate participants. The systematic destruction of evidence created gaps in the historical record that historians have struggled to explain for centuries. The sudden disappearance of certain Roman officials, the unexplained changes in shipping patterns, the mysterious redesignation of Planasia of these puzzles make sense only when understood as part of the coordinated effort to hide the human hunts. But the cover-up also created an unintended consequence. It preserved the hunts as a kind of historical myth. Rumors and whispered stories persisted long after the official records were destroyed. Medieval chroniclers recorded tales of Roman demon hunts on mysterious islands. Renaissance scholars noted strange gaps in classical sources and speculated about hidden horrors. These persistent rumors, combined with the systematic nature of the evidence destruction, actually helped modern historians piece together what happened. The very thoroughness of the cover-up became evidence of its own to want go to such lengths to hide routine activities. The rediscovery of the human hunts represents a triumph of modern archaeological and historical methodology. By combining careful analysis of fragmentary textual evidence with sophisticated archaeological techniques, researchers have been able to reconstruct events that their perpetrators believed they had erased forever. But this rediscovery also raises uncomfortable questions about what other horrors might be hidden in history's shadows. If the Romans could successfully hide systematic human hunting for nearly 2,000 years, what other atrocities have been lost to historical silence? As we reach the end of this journey into one of history's darkest chapters, we're left with questions that extend far beyond ancient Rome. The systematic hunting of human beings on Planasia wasn't an aberration. It was the logical endpoint of a society that had completely dehumanized an entire class of people. The Romans didn't wake up one day and decide to hunt humans for sport. They arrived at this horror through a series of small steps, each one seeming reasonable given the moral framework of their society. Slavery was legal and socially acceptable. Violence against slaves was routine and unregulated. Public entertainment increasingly featured human suffering and death. Private entertainment for the wealthy naturally evolved to exceed public spectacles in intensity and cruelty. The progression was gradual, systematic, and within the context of Roman values entirely logical. This is perhaps the most disturbing lesson of all. Human beings can rationalize any level of cruelty if they first convince themselves that their victims are unfully human. The Roman elite who participated in these hunts weren't monsters in the sense we usually understand the term. They were educated, cultured individuals who wrote poetry, practiced philosophy, and considered themselves the pinnacle of civilization. They built magnificent cities, created lasting works of art, and established legal principles that still influence our world today. But they also reduced other human beings to the status of hunting quarry, pursuing them across rocky islands while they screamed in terror, and mounting their severed heads as trophies in their villa trophy rooms. This contradiction between civilization and savagery, between high culture and ultimate cruelty, isn't unique to Rome. Every society that has practiced systematic, dehumanization has produced similar contradictions. Educated doctors conducted medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Cultured plantation owners tortured enslaved people. Refined colonial administrators oversaw genocidal policies. The capacity for both civilization and savagery exists within human nature, and the veneer of culture and education provides no protection against moral collapse when a society decides that some people aren't fully human. The hunting practices on Planasia were possible because Roman society had created a legal and moral framework that made slaves into property. Once that framework existed, once human beings were reduced to the status of objects, every subsequent horror became not just possible, but inevitable. The successful cover-up of these hunts also teaches us about the fragility of historical memory. The Romans nearly succeeded in erasing these events entirely from human knowledge. Only the persistence of archaeological evidence and the occasional survival of fragmentary documents allowed modern researchers to piece together what happened. How many other horrors have been successfully hidden? How many atrocities have been lost to the deliberate destruction of evidence and the systematic silencing of witnesses? The Roman cover-up succeeded for nearly 2,000 years, a reminder that those in power have always had both the motive and the means to hide their worst actions from historical scrutiny. But perhaps the most important lesson is that exposure and remembrance matter. The Romans tried to hide these hunts not because they felt shame. Their letters and personal accounts show no evidence of moral qualms, but because they understood that public knowledge would threaten their power and privilege. They were right to be afraid of exposure. When societies are forced to confront the full extent of their own cruelty, change becomes possible. The systematic hunting of human beings on Planasia ended not because the participants developed consciences, but because Marcus Aurelius understood that knowledge of these practices would be politically devastating. Today, as we uncover this buried history, we honor the memory of those who died as quarry in the ultimate hunt. We remember the unnamed slaves who were transported to Planasia in the holds of ships, who were held in underground chambers while waiting their turn, who were released onto rocky terrain to be pursued by Rome's most powerful citizens. Their names are lost to history. Their stories exist only in the fragmentary evidence of their suffering. But by uncovering and telling this story, we ensure that their deaths weren't completely meaningless. They serve as a warning about what happens when societies lose their moral anchors. The island of Planasia still exists, now known as Pianosa. It's a nature preserve, largely uninhabited and peaceful. Tourists occasionally visit to enjoy its pristine beaches and clear waters. Most have no idea that they're walking on ground that once echoed with the screams of human beings hunted for sport by the most powerful empire in human history. The hunting facilities are long gone, overgrown by Mediterranean vegetation and worn down by centuries of wind and rain. The underground chambers, where slaves waited in terror, have been filled in or collapsed. The observation posts, where Roman senators watched their quarry's desperate flight, have crumbled into scattered stones. But the island remembers, in the pattern of the rocks, in the silence of certain coves, in the way the wind moves through the abandoned spaces. Pianosa holds the memory of what happened there. And now, through our investigation into this forgotten horror, so do we. The story of the forgotten island, where Roman senators hunted naked slaves for pleasure, is ultimately a story about the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion, about the importance of moral courage in the face of systematic evil, and about the responsibility we all bear to remember and learn from history's darkest chapters. Because if we forget, if we allow these stories to slip back into the shadows where their perpetrators tried to hide them, we leave ourselves vulnerable to repeating them. The Romans who participated in these hunts were human beings just like us. They were capable of the same rationalizations, the same moral blind spots, the same systematic dehumanization of others. The only protection against becoming them is to remember what they did, to understand how they justified it to themselves, and to remain vigilant against the same moral failures in our own time. The hunt.